raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Men Talking Mindfulness. We're dropping in with Errol Doebler today in our Masculinity 2.0. This is our upgrade number 4, where we're going to talk about toxic leadership awareness. Errol Doebler's been on our show before. He is a former Navy SEAL, former FBI agent, leadership coach with it's leader193.com. Is that right, Errol?
That's it. That's
right.
It.
Yeah. Leader193.com. And also author. We broke down his book on our first episode. I think that was in season 3. And I love even just the title of your book, Errol, The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, how leaders inspire confidence and clarity in combat, in the boardroom, and at the kitchen table.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about, what toxic leadership looks like in the workplace, what it looks like in your family, and why it even exists, and where it all kind of comes from. And that's why we brought our man, Errol Doebler, back on the show to help us understand this and kind of deconstruct it, so maybe it can be a better leader instead of a toxic leader. So where should we begin, gentlemen? What are you feeling?
Well, I mean, let's just jump right in. I mean, I know, okay. Errol, in your book, we dove deep into that the first time we ever spoke to you, but I remember you specifically talking about, the leadership in the SEAL teams versus the leadership in the FBI, and how there was some seriously toxic. I think that Tim was the name that of one.
That's right.
That you referenced. I don't know if that was actually a pseudonym or that was the real name, but there was toxic leadership there. So let's, as we normally do, Will, we talk about kind of defining things. Let's define what toxic leadership looks like.
Yes, awesome, love it.
Cool. Well, look, that was going to kind of be my question. By the way, it's great to see you guys again.
Thank you.
I've got, I think, right, identifying or defining the terms we're using is super important. And whether my definition is different than your definition, we'll speak to a definition. Sure. But I think we kind of think normally it would be, that person who's just yelling and screaming and name calling the whole time, which is accurate. That's toxic. But, a lot of times it's just so much more subtle than that. And Will, you asked me, you just, as we were prompting each other on this, hey, maybe 5 things, that you see. And I was like, well, I could definitely come up with 5 things, but they would all be a subcategory of 2 areas, the way I see it. And it's ego and fear. Right? As I really broke it down, what are the 2 things, in my view, that creates that toxicity? Because the toxicity can be very subtle, in my view, right? And let's just, for example, ego, right? My way or the highway. Don't come to me with your big, great ideas. You're going to do it this way because I know better, right? That, whether that person is right or wrong, that's a toxic environment. Fear. I won't enforce, behavioral guidelines. I won't identify the things I'm going to hold people accountable to because I want people to like me, and that's too hard, and I don't want to come across like Hitler. Well, now everybody just gets to act the way they want to act, and it's because you were too afraid to set clear boundaries, the clear boundaries that the leader needs to set. So, maybe that's a good place to start. But that's after I gave it a lot of thought, I'm like, everything else, in my view, will iterate off of those 2 places, ego and fear.
Yeah. And it's, I agree. That's the first thing that came up for me as I started to dive into this topic is like, I wrote here, like, what are toxic leaders so scared of? Right. Yeah. And it's that fear. And maybe that should be something we can break down. And I think it goes against the fear of what? Of letting go of control. Like, I know there's a lot of micromanaging, a lot of, a control that a lot of leaders continually implement into the workplace, and they try to, everything, like you said earlier, my way or the highway. The fear of taking risks, the fear of not succeeding, which, or not always succeeding, I think, or measuring up to the same kind of metrics or the way that that success is measured within a family or a company, and maybe the unwillingness to redefine, what success looks like in some ways, and the ability, I think, to fail, which leads eventually to success if you're not a toxic leader and have the ability to go back, reflect, take responsibility, understand where you could do better the next time, and then getting buy-in from the rest of your team and getting feedback from the rest of your team and willing to take criticism. And this is when you have a very strong ego intact. All those things, you try to do everything you can to prevent anything that I just mentioned from happening, I feel. To take that reflection, to take that moment, take that pause and be like, wait, how did I fuck this up? Instead of being like everyone else fucked this up. I didn't. My leadership is great. So what is it? Yeah.
I mean, I think that as we give examples here, and I think your audience is going to be a tough subject for a lot of people to swallow, right? Because again, when you hear toxic leadership, you just have this image of some crazy maniac yelling and screaming, and it's just, in my view, so much more subtle. So, right. So from the private sector, and then, I'd love to share. I left the FBI, and I have always made it clear out of a huge frustration with its leadership, and that's starting to play out in public now. And people ask me a lot about it, and my response is, the criticism the FBI is getting right now is deserved. These things are happening, and it comes from these brands of toxic leadership, and this is how it manifests itself. But to the private sector, what are the things that I see in my role when I'm coaching executives and teams, right? It's the leader not letting people do things the way they want to do them, right? And that goes to a planning process saying, okay, here's what we need to accomplish. Here's the mission. Come back and tell me how you're going to do it. That, in my view, is the way it should be done. It's typically, here's what we're doing. Here's how you're going to do it. Okay, go.
Right.
Okay, so now you've got a bunch of robots. All right. I guess he or she knows best. We go do it. We get it right or we get it wrong. And then that's the way now. That is the culture. That is the way things are done. And then the boss starts complaining. Nobody takes his initiative around here. I have to tell him to do everything. And meanwhile, it's like, dude, that's what you trained them to do. And now you're complaining that all of a sudden they're not breaking out of your mold because now for every initiative, you have to do this thing because that's what you trained. And then that becomes an incredibly toxic environment, right? If you think about it in the most subtle ways. I don't know if I'm overreaching there and trying to fit a square peg in a round toxic environment hole, but I don't think I am.
I don't think so either. I mean, I think basically what you're talking about is the difference between an active toxic leader and a passive toxic leader, right? The active one is the one that we all kind of envision when you hear toxic leadership, is yelling and demeaning. And the other one is still toxic, but they're doing so because they're micromanaging, because they're telling you how to do something and judging whether something is done right or wrong by how closely you did it to how close you are to their how, not how close you are to their desired end state. So, I mean, like, I go as a leader, I say, okay, I want you to do this. I want you to get from point A to point B, and you arrive at point B. That to me is success. But if I say, I want you to get from point A to point B, and this is how I want you to get there, and this is what I want you to do along the way, and then you arrive at point B, which is success, but I'm saying, well, you didn't say it how, you didn't do how I wanted you to do it. That is toxic as well.
Well, and it's right. Like, I want you to go out to the road, hitchhike for 1 mile. Then I want you to go rent a car and drive that for 2 miles, right? And it may be
exactly.
that. And then get on the train, and then you go, yeah, okay, boss, but I could just walk right from here to there, and I'd be good. Don't you question me? Do it as I say.
Right.
100% that happens. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't question me. I don't want to hear your insubordination. Go do it my way.
Right.
Oh, okay. That's
right.
Toxic,
Yeah. And well, I think what you brought up a good point. It's like, good leaders, I'd imagine, keep the humanity in their community, in their work environment versus robotic, you said, and nobody likes to be treated like a robot, or from my experience, like, I don't want to be treated like a robot. I love, and there's no shortage of information out there talking about the power of bringing autonomy to the workforce, letting them come up with their own map forward, that like they feel rewarded just even being bestowed that on, not that honor, if you will, but yes, in some ways, be like, hey, you make this happen. This is the end goal. Here's the goal. Let me know if I can support you in any way. Right. And, the deadline's in like 3 weeks or a month or something like that. Go,
versus I like what you said there, Will, with the autonomy piece. Right. And,
it's huge.
Kotler talks about it. I think James Clear talks about it in developing positive habits and developing that. Daniel Pink also talks about it in Drive. Developing that intrinsic motivation comes from having a mastery over something, but then also having autonomy over something. If you can have those three, you can develop that intrinsic drive to actually accomplish it. You get that dopamine hit. You continually want to get better. But if you take away that autonomy, you basically destroy your team, you destroy your culture. And that, even though it may not be viewed as toxic, you're destroying a team, you're destroying a motivation, you may be even destroying an individual, and that is toxic.
Well, and it's not a sustainable leadership model. And
there you go.
That in and of itself is toxic, right? Something that's not sustainable. And look, the question of autonomy is a good question. Then we need to ask, well, okay, well, how do you create autonomy? Okay, well, it's just really what we said. I am the leader. This is the mission. Come back to me with your plan. Done. That's autonomous. Right? You're still, and then people say, yeah, but I have no control over what happens. And what happens if they screw it all up? Well, hold on. That's a whole different issue. Okay. You're the leader. You have to hear the plan. Okay. And if you don't like the plan, you have to ask questions. You have to ask contingency questions. Well, okay, you want to hitchhike, right? What will you do if you're sitting there for 4 hours, 5 hours, and no cars come by? And now it's getting to midnight, given your A to B example, right?
Right.
What will you do next? That question's allowed. That's not micromanaging. That is challenge. That is your job as a leader. You're still requiring them to come up with that answer. So autonomy in and of itself is important. But then again, the knowledge on how to create it, and why won't people say, here's the mission, tell me how you're going to do it, okay? Because there's either a massive ego that won't let somebody come up with a better idea than they do, or some type of fear that they will come up with a better idea. Now they're afraid they're not going to look as good because they're the leader, right? Which is ridiculous.
Right.
Or some other fear, right? There's going to be something, but it's just going to come down to ego and fear around why we don't create that autonomy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And funny, you talked about the how, and giving somebody the mission and say, okay, tell me how you're going to accomplish it. We just had Stephen Drum on, also retired Navy SEAL Master Chief, buddy of mine that was at SEAL Team 10 with me. And he talked about understanding commander's intent and how important that is. And, okay, yes, I understand commander's intent. My commander and his commander, his or her commander, knowing 1 or 2 levels above you and what it is that they want to get accomplished, but you don't need to know the how. You can develop that how, and that comes with that gives you that sense of autonomy and a sense of accomplishment if you do in fact do it. But as a leader, if we're telling people how the whole time, we're taking away that autonomy and destroying them. So I like bringing in the commander's intent, kind of military aspect of things. And I also want to go back to the fear and ego, right? I honestly think they're tied together. I think a lot of the time, the fear that we're experiencing is ego driven, right?
Yes.
Like we like Will mentioned, we are fearing failure. We're feeling, like you just mentioned, Errol, somebody else overshadowing us because they came up with a better way of doing something.
Right.
It's all driven by fear and ego, and those are so inextricably intertwined. We talk about the abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset. And I think a lot of that toxic leadership comes from
that scarcity mindset, which is driven by ego and fear as well. There's so much here for toxic leadership, toxic cultures as well.
And these are again, the toxic environment. Once again, the stereotype, I think, would be somebody intentionally doing these things, and this this ego and fear might be in place as interconnected as you say it is, because somebody just doesn't know about leadership, right? They haven't read The Process, Art, and Science of Leadership, right? But you know what I'm saying? They have, but they have, right? Oh, sorry about that.
No, don't.
It was great, man. It was great. Well played.
Great book.
But I mean, like, go read a book, right? Go read a book on leadership to give you some type of guideline, some type of place to go. And the fact that you may not even read a book, then that's the bad ego and fear. Like, I don't need to read a book. But here's another thing that I see working with corporations that creates this toxic environment. Yeah. And it's around prioritization. Everybody, I mean, you want to talk about following shiny objects. I can't, because I still work with them, but I work with a couple of large organizations, and this is a massively large organization. And sometimes I wonder how they make one single dollar, right? Because if this corporation has, close to 1 million people worldwide, right? They're not going to come in. Leader 193 is not going to come in and change the culture of that. But I work with the individual teams around it. And if my program is 8 weeks long, I'm not lying when I say week to week, there's a new thing to deal with because the priority has changed. We're no longer, because we're working on this thing that they're doing, and we're going through the leadership process, and we're breaking it down, and what's the plan, and the whole thing. So I'll get on the call and they go, okay, where are we on this? Like, well, we had to scrap it because they just changed something. I'm like, well, where's this initiative? I don't know. They just said this one was the new one. So then you get 15 initiatives, okay, that just die on the vine. And you could be doing everything else right. But if nobody's ever finishing something they start, okay, that's going to create an environment where people are just a little tired. And I tell you, and so that's, I just, shared it on a massive scale with a massive company. But the same thing will happen with the smaller organization. Now it's easier to kind of fix, at least for my role, to go, whoa, hold on a second. You can only do 2 things at a time. You don't have enough people to do more than that in the time frame you want. But, I think that inability to prioritize and stick to those priorities until you move on to something else is a massive shortcoming in corporate culture.
Well, I think it sounds like it's am my mic okay? Yeah, my mic's good.
Yeah,
it sounds like a massive reaction to the market instead of having a plan, executing that plan, also knowing that within that plan, you're going to have to make some adjustments, and things might not always you might not always seem like you're going up all the time, progressing, growing, making more money, if that's what the goal is. But just to be in that reactive state, what's come up for me a little bit is I feel like we're in this massive reactive state of the world. Because we're so tethered to the instantaneous results on our phone. How many likes did I get? Like how many, how many comments are I getting? How many people are reviewing this product? And maybe that's part of this incredible reactivity within, what you're talking about, the continual reprioritization of the business model. Yep. And that doesn't, and where does that leave? Again, it's like, where does that leave your people? Why not asking your the people that are within the company, what they think their priority should be, or what, why not work from as a holistic group, as a team, instead of it just coming from, 5 or 6 people that maybe don't understand the product very well, or whatever it is. Like, it's just a horrible way to lead, because you're leading based on what, and maybe that's part of it too. It's like, what if you're in a company, Errol, and they're like, well, we've always done things this way, and we're worth $35 billion. So why should we change anything? Like,
I had, when I was going through Buds, I went through with a guy named Jim Randall, who he was unfortunately killed just a couple of years into the war on terror. But anyway, he was a Marine beforehand, and he was in Desert Storm. And he said something to me that I say it all the time, and it's kind of like the analogy I just used with this company. I don't understand how they make a single dollar. He was just breaking down the military infrastructure and bureaucracy, and and this is on the heels of the Gulf War, and he was a tank guy, I think. And anyway, he goes, sometimes I wonder how we are ever even have the capacity to join a war, let alone fight one and win it, because of how things get bogged down. Now, somehow the military overcomes that. But here are some things, again, just based on your point, Will. When I ask about where these new initiatives come from, I can promise you on more than one occasion it was speculation. Well, somebody was sitting in the meeting with the boss, and he made an offhand comment about how he thought something might look, in a new light. And everybody just takes that and runs with it. Like, this didn't happen, but to break that example down, right? Somebody's handing the big boss some marketing material, and it's on a bright orange sheet of paper, and he's looking at it, and he goes, "Oh, that's nice." He goes, "But I always just did love the color blue." And that's it. All of a sudden, the marketing team is like, "We got to change everything to blue."
Right. Yeah.
The guy just made an offhand comment. He never said, "I don't want this," whatever it was. And the point is, we talk about toxic leadership, toxic environment, with nobody being able to say, "Okay, boss, are you actually saying to change it to blue?" He's like, "No, I think the orange looks great. What are you talking about?" I was just, whatever it is. That didn't happen, but that's an example of things that happen. Yeah. And that creates this craziness. So all of a sudden and again, it would be boring if I told you the things they speculated on, but they went back, and this is different companies multiple times. They went back to the boss with the new thing they thought he wanted.
Right.
And he was like, "When did this become the new plan?" Right? He had no idea. And now everybody's all pissed off because the boss. So again, toxic environment. And it's like people don't even know they're creating it just from that lack of, leadership.
Yeah.
The flip side of that too is, as a leader, being aware of how what you say is interpreted by your people. Right. So, and you have to be aware of that, which comes to toxic leadership awareness, right? So you may be an awesome leader, but you're not paying attention to how the words that you say are interpreted by your people. And you say, "Oh, I've always liked the color blue." Well, what relevance does that have to the conversation? And your people take it as, "Well, I want everything to be blue."
Right.
And then they waste a week making everything blue when you never said that, nor was that your intent. So there's, two sides to that. There's your subordinate leaders who are going to suddenly run with that and be like, "Hey, boss said he wants everything blue." No, your boss never said that.
Right.
That's how you interpret it. But as the boss who's saying that, if you see that happen once because of an offhand comment that you made, you need to be aware that's how your people are going to interpret what you say. And so I think that the responsibility is on really both organizations.
100%. And that it does create a toxic environment, right? This is the passive elements of your guys' topic, which I think is a great topic. I literally I'm working with a guy now who's in charge of the company, and that was literally the thing he was going to start working on based on the work we did. I have to stop making these offhand comments. And he went through a series of things that happened. Either he hurt people's feelings or something was done that he was like, "What? I never said that." And at least he had the insight to come up with that himself based on what we were talking about.
That's great.
But it created chaos. So, that environment gets created in so many strange, unique ways.
And that environment you're talking about, Errol, is like a fearful environment. Like to not even raise, to say like, "Hey, going from blue to orange," for someone to raise their hand in that meeting, like, "Hey, Mr. Boss, Mr. Leader," it's like, "We did market research on this 6 months ago. And we decided to go in this color because of the research and the stuff that we did as a team." And then bringing that into his awareness, and if he wants to switch his idea after hearing that, great. But to live in an environment where you're just, I feel they're just trying to please the boss.
Right.
Just please the boss, make him happy, so then I can get my raise, or and maybe I feel like this boss in this kind of environment, like, really is it's creating that toxic environment, because he doesn't sound like it's a inclusive environment, in the sense of, like, bring your ideas, like, please question me, like, let's grow this together, and using all the minds that are in the room with all the great creativity and all the wonderful skills and the various skills that everyone has, in order to really effectively continually move forward based on the priorities, that you identified in the beginning of the year or that quarter, and it so much can come from that. I feel like, you tell me, Errol, like, a lot of these leadership and the leaderships create the environment, and what environment are they creating? And is that something you even talk about, as far as, okay, what kind of work environment do you want to have, or what kind of feelings that you want that your employees to have every time they walk in? Are we taking risks? Are we innovating? Are we, working with autonomy? Are we collaborating over the creativity? And, if I know, going off here a little bit, but,
but you're aware. You're aware.
I'm fully aware. I'm fully aware of all the fucking problems that are out there. I feel, even I work alone. I work with John. He's a fucking terrible boss. I'm just kidding. No, we work together on this. I'm just kidding. John's awesome. But yeah. So where can we go with that, Errol?
Well, I think it might be a good spot, if you're game, to start telling some stories.
Let's do it.
So look,
I love your stories, Errol.
The FBI. So you're going to get look, I anytime something goes sideways, there's two sides, right? And let me acknowledge up front that there are probably some things I could have handled better in these situations that I'm going to relay to you, but it still would have been the same spirit of going against what was happening. I don't know that I stood a chance. So we'll start piecemeal here. So, I generally worked cases. So this is when I moved out of terrorism, and I went to a smaller office. I was in New York City for a while, and then I went to a smaller office, and the size of the office was the size of my squad in New York City. That's how small it was, right? So, then in I come, right, and I had made some pretty good terrorism cases, so I come with a reputation, and really it's like, well, Mr. New York City thinks he's going to come here and tell us that, like, you want to talk about bumfuck, I was like, I can't even believe what I'm looking at. I walked in the first day in a suit and tie, and they were like, ooh, Mr. New York City. So that's what I was dealing with out of the gate, right? So anyway, so I'm working a case, and it's a gang case, and it's against a gang that had just absolutely terrorized this neighborhood and community for years, 20 years, and went back to the case files. There was 3 separate cases on this gang, and nobody could get anything done. So I was like, well, I'll take a shot at it, right? And I was pretty good at recruiting sources. So I recruited a couple of sources. They got us inside the gang. Now we've got people in there. Now we're getting intelligence, and now it's time to start operating, right? It's time to start disrupting some things. And these guys were like every other gang, guns and drugs. And it was the more guns, right? Because every gang does drugs. But we had the gun angle, and it was scary what they were doing. So I put together a plan, and we were gonna buy some weapons, and I put my plan in, and my boss says, well, okay, this looks okay, but you should think about doing this part of it this way. Whatever the details were. I'm like, okay, thanks. But I go, we're approved? He goes, yeah, good luck. I'm like, great. So we go, and we have undercovers in. We're meeting people that nobody's ever met before. It's all on video. We're buying guns, making new deals, making new connections. And the way I did it was the way I did it. It was what was documented. I come back, and I get sat down, and my boss and his boss start ripping into me. And I'm literally like, is there another operation going on out there that you're mixing me up with? They're like, we told you that we wanted you to execute those sales this way. I go, no, you didn't. I said, you made a recommendation that I didn't take.
Right.
And I asked before I left, is this plan approved? And they said, you should have known that's what we meant. And I immediately said, no, I fucking shouldn't have known. If you wanted me to know something, you need to tell me. That's exactly what you want. Oh, well, we thought you were smarter than that. And I said,
now they're insulting you, right?
Yeah, now we're, so this was the brand of toxic leadership that everybody, and so at that point, I probably could have done something other than go, well, I'm sorry, I thought you were a lot fucking smarter than that, right? I didn't, So again, I am acknowledging that I have culpability in some of this stuff.
Yeah.
The point is, now we start getting micromanaged, and in the worst possible way. And I say, okay.
If I can stop 1 second, if I can stop you. So here you got results, right? You got guns, you did this, and they know this, and they just ignored it completely. That didn't fucking matter.
They went right to, you disobeyed a direct order. I said, there is no such order given. Okay. Wow. Yeah. I disobeyed nothing. You signed this operational sheet. Right, okay. Right. So now and again, I'm giving you broad strokes, right? I could spend 2 hours on that op alone. But anyway, so now we're getting deeper and deeper in spite of their micromanagement. And it's time for me to now do some big things with big money. And so I said to the boss, I go, all right, I need to make a request. There's this program out here that I found. They've got a ton of cash, and I'm going to ask for some money because I think I'll get it quickly because we need it for, the buys and so on and so forth, and to get the next introduction. And he goes, well, what are you going to ask for? 5,000? And I go, yeah, plus a zero. And, I was like, 5,000. And I said, no, I said plus a zero. And he goes, well, that's ridiculous. That'll never get approved. I go, okay, well, there's no skin off your nose to let me request it. And let's prove you right. I literally said, let's prove you right. He goes, no, I won't allow it. So I knew he was.
You're reliving the frustration. That's how fucked up this is, right?
See it. We can see it.
So I know he's going on leave the next day. Right? So I kind of sit on. I go, hey, boss, why don't we just, before we just put a nix on this, let's marinate on it, right? Let's think about it. He goes, fine. I go, okay. So he leaves. I now maintain chain of command. And I go to the person at headquarters and I say, I want to submit this request. The boss is out of town and I think you're the next signature anyway. What do you want me to do? And they go, no, that's fine. You're good. I go, okay, but the boss is out of town. He's not signing off on this. They're like, yeah, no worries. They called me back like an hour later. They're like, approved. You kidding me? This is perfect.
50K.
By the time the boss gets back in 2 days, I'm counting out the 50K on my desk. Where did that come from? I said, I told you, right? He goes, I told you not to do that. I said, no, we agreed that we would think about it. And then I just ran it by headquarters and they had it approved. The point is, he tried to call headquarters and say, take the money back. Take the money back. He disobeyed a direct order. And they were like, what are you talking about? He's about to buy like 4 AK-47s and be introduced to the person that nobody's ever seen before. Like, no, we're not taking the money back. My point is, these things started to happen over and over again. And could I have done better not to work the system so well to get what I wanted and maybe been more collaborative? I could have, but then I don't think it would have been, things wouldn't have been approved.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Bottom line is, okay, now here's what we've got. We've got a cache of weapons, anywhere from AK-47s, sawed-off shotguns, standard pistol. We had a 50 caliber handgun. Like, it was a joke. I didn't think those things, it was like this big. I'm like, we got a 50 caliber handgun.
Something out of the movies, right?
It was something out of the movies, right? And we've got cocaine and heroin, okay? And so I just came back from an op, and the recording device, it was late, so I bought it home, and I was going to, bring it back the next day. We the recording device clicks on. And I'm in my room, I'm in the kitchen with my wife, who was an FBI employee, and my father-in-law, who was a former FBI employee. And I start making up the martinis. Right? You can hear it on the fucking recording. Anyway, I start venting about how frustrated I am with the FBI leadership. I don't call anybody a name, but here's the thing. It was the greatest rant that nobody could hold against me, right? I wasn't like, that fucking little dick cocksucker, right? I did none of that, right? It was weirdly, completely professional. I'm very frustrated in the way they're micromanaging everything and the way he's trying to undercut this, literally laying out the facts. Right?
I love how you call it weirdly professional.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah.
Right. In the background from my third martini. Right? So anyway, this gets found out, right? As you go through the process and somebody's like, Errol, do you know what just happened? I'm like, no. So they're like, you recorded yourself at home. And I'm like, so what? And then I'm like, when was that? I'm like, oh shit. I go, was I making martinis? Right? And they're like, yeah. Was that noise? So the point is, I go, I'm pretty hip on what I said. And I said, it shouldn't be a problem. Like, I think the boss isn't going to like it, but first of all, it's not going to be admissible because it has nothing to do with the case. The judge is going to argue this doesn't need to be to the jury. And even if it is, the jury's going to be like, oh, this guy hates his boss, but here's the evidence. So I was like, so what? And my wife was like, Errol, no, that's not the way it's going to go down. Trust me. Mm-hmm. Long story short, okay? They shut down the case. Shut it down. Done. Because of this tape. I've compromised the thing. And I said, well, I haven't compromised anyway. I said, guys, they're like, when are we going to get our apology? I said, you're not going to get your apology. I go, what I said in there, I meant. I go, I'm sorry you had to hear it this way. They're like, well, why didn't you tell us? I go, because I was trying to get through a case. I go, trust me when I tell you, when we were going to arrest the gang that nobody could touch for 20 years, I was going to tell you what I thought of you, but I was going to wait till we were done. Literally, I said those words. Mm-hmm. So they shut it down. I go, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to count for all the weapons and drugs and video recordings of all of these transactions? How are you going to account for that? Don't worry about it because you're not going to be here. I go, what do you mean I'm not going to be here? They're like, you are a disruptive force. And literally, the East Coast of the United States cannot have you here. You are being transferred elsewhere.
Wow.
I said, let me get this straight. The East Coast of the United States is being affected by me? They're like, yes.
Doing your job.
Just because I am a problem. So they have this thing called something no longer able to effectively operate, do your job. So you need to be transferred. The basis of it is if you were like an undercover employee and you got compromised, like, well, you're no longer able to do your job because you've been compromised. So we've got to transfer you. It wasn't meant to be punitive. So these guys, and again, I keep saying long story short, I'll make a long story less long. They start going through this process to uproot me and my family from where we are to some random place. And my boss says, I wouldn't fight this, Errol, because if you fight it, all the facts are going to have to come out. And I said, boy, let me introduce myself. My name is Errol Doebler, in case you are you kidding me? You think that's something? So we had to go through this whole process. Mm-hmm. They wrote all this stuff, and then I had to defend it. I literally had the highest levels of Washington calling me going, we're sorry this happened. This is a travesty. If I didn't fight the way I fought, they would have gotten their way. It just so happened I've got a little game in me, and I fought it. But when we talk about toxic leadership, let's bring it back home. Yes. Ego, fear, regardless of what's happening, that's how we're doing business. man, that's why I left the FBI, right? The work itself, I loved. It was that craziness, right? People got into these positions of power, and then these are the things they did. So, yeah. So hopefully it's a good story, and hopefully it fits into what we're doing. But
go ahead, John.
Well, if those guys had been aware of their toxic leadership. Now, granted, what you said, hey, who doesn't go home and talk to their spouse about their leadership, right?
Right.
Hey, whether it's, hey, you're frustrated with micromanagement, you're frustrated with a particular decision made. There's things that are said in your home, understanding and thinking that you have complete privacy. I mean, your particular instance was not that way. Then how they interpreted it, they took it personally, got wrapped up in it. Ego and fear got involved again here. As leaders, how do we become aware of our own toxic leadership?
Yeah.
Or as subordinates, how do we address that to a superior who we know is going to be wrapped up in their ego and fear without fear of getting fired? Yeah. How do we do that?
Yeah, look, that's the $1 million question. And unfortunately, there's not a very good answer. Right? There's a couple basic things, right? Hey, boss, can I try it this way? Do you mind? Right? Leadership up, asking for what you want in a professional way. Okay, that's in many instances the best you can do. They will either say yes or no. Okay, but then what we've got to come to, and it's what I came to, is what are you willing to tolerate? Right? What are you willing to tolerate? Where are your priorities? And are you willing to be a part of a culture that does these things? The answer might be yes, and that's okay. Yes, I disagree with everything that's happening in this company. I disagree with its culture, but I need this job. Therefore, I will suck it up and stay here. That's okay. That's your decision. Okay, right. But unfortunately, in many instances, that's the decision that needs to be made, right? So when we start saying, this goes against everything I stand for. Okay, and what? Because you have to then make a decision. Either you live with it and just get on with it, right? Because there's no sense complaining about it. You've identified it, or you make a change for yourself. And that is super scary. I'm not advocating for people to quit their jobs. Right. Let's just be honest about what it is. There's only so much you're going to be able to do. Again, approaching the boss, having a professional conversation, asking them, do you mind if I try to do it this way? Because, right, giving reasons behind what you want. All about professionalism, but understanding that you may or may not get what you want. And then you just simply have to ask yourself the question, and what now? What am I willing to tolerate? And it might be a lot and it might be nothing, but you've got to come to that on your own. You know, that's kind of a crappy answer.
It's a hard situation too, because, you know, like you maybe have mouths to feed at home, or, you know, you just bought a new home or something like that. And it's like, I need this job. And what's sad in that situation, when you just suck it up and tolerate it, you're just adding to the toxic environment. You're actually enabling a toxic leader in a lot of ways, which is kind of sad, you know, because you're unwilling to question, unwilling, you know, to rock the boat, unwilling to even have your name recognized, if you will, by the leader, because you think that's like a bad thing. It's just, it's all, I mean, one thing that came up too, as well as the ego part, is like the power of being in a leadership position, and how is, in your experience, like, is that kind of toxic to the soul, toxic to the environment? And how do you deal with, like, say you plan on being a partner at some law firm someday, you know, and maybe you see that trajectory and it's very close, a couple years away. It's like, how do you prevent yourself from being, you know, overcome by power, accessing this or inflating this ego, and then continually creating a new toxic environment under your leadership?
Yeah. Again, there's just simply no good answer to that, because so much of that is out of your control. And you know, it's what we talked about the first time I was on, right? The difference in the leadership from the SEAL teams to the FBI. The SEAL teams, they have their problems. Okay. They're not perfect, but the expectation is clear. And when you get somebody who is just a complete moron of a leader, everybody has the same general reaction, like, "Ooh, God, how the hell did he get? How'd that happen?" Whereas in the FBI, it's the opposite. Like, yep, there's another one. And the thing about it is, as we kind of close up, leaving is a scary thing. But I left the FBI, and then my wife left the FBI, and we were petrified. We were working without a net. We had, at that time, 2 kids, 1 on the way, and we just said, well, we can't live with what we're seeing, so we're going to go for it. Like most things, best decision I ever made. Because of that decision, I started to meet new people, right? I started my company. Now we are autonomous. Now we do get to build something. Then I met, and it's something we didn't really get to, I met a doctor, right? Because I was at a party, because based on business leaders being at a party who had this non-pharmaceutical cure for TBI, which I was able to then take and get myself healed after suffering for 20 years with something I didn't know. My point is, again, and I would love at some point, maybe we can tell that story, but the point is, you make that move that is so scary. People who make it very rarely come back and go, that was the worst thing I ever did to get out of that toxic environment that I was in. I don't hear those stories, so I don't know what the answer is. And I don't say just leave, but
talking about that one leadership up, right? You talked about leading up. And I just want to give an example of an instance that I had in the SEAL teams. I mean, we've talked about the FBI, and you said, hey, the kind of the exception in the SEAL teams is the bad leaders. And I don't want to turn this into an FBI bashing session.
Yeah, it kind of is. Sometimes it's time.
But the truth hurts.
Well, in the SEAL teams, I had this one particular leader who I'm like really good friends with, but he ended up being a leader of mine. I was working directly for him, and some things that he was doing was very toxic, and I struggled with it, and it was trickling down. Right, it was causing me to be toxic, and my people saw it, and then they came to me and they're like, "Hey, boss, hey, you're not acting like you normally do. Let's what's happening?" And then and I ended up going to this one individual. So he was my troop commander. So I was the platoon commander. He was my troop commander. For those listening, I was one position below him. And I went to his troop senior enlisted guy. So he had a senior chief working for him. And I know this is all getting lost in the rank and everything, but bottom line is he had an enlisted guy working with him that I went to. And I'm like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm hearing from the guys. And he was like, well, let's talk with him. I'm like, well, he's my boss. I can't bring this up to him and tell him that his leadership is toxic. And he's like, well, yeah, you can. We can counsel up. Yeah. He's like, you can counsel up. And I was like, counsel up? I've never, I've been counseled down, but I've never counseled up. Yeah. He's like, well,
many occasions.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, well, let's do it. So we set up a meeting, and we actually did counsel up. I sat down with him, and he would be okay. I'm not going to share names, but he would be okay with me sharing the story, because he actually was very thankful for me doing that, for us doing that. And he said that changed his leadership style for the rest of his career. And that affected him positively professionally, but also personally on his personal life. So our being aware of our own toxic leadership is important. And sometimes it takes having somebody point that out to us. Right. And this comes back to the ego. Set that fucking ego aside, listen to what is being said, and you can, in fact, become a better leader, better person because of it, if you are able to set that ego aside. If he had said, you know what, fuck you, you're below me, this is not how things work, you're not supposed to counsel up, he would have carried that forward. And he would have been that same leader, affecting somebody else negatively, affecting another team negatively. Whereas he set his ego aside, listened to what we had to say, and changed, and is better for it. And we still are good friends to this day. And he shares that story with me often. I'm like, hell yeah. He's like, do you remember when? I'm like, hell yeah, I remember that.
Right, because it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. That's why I remember it.
Yeah.
And that just goes again to the power of, we want to talk about toxic leadership and leadership, because it affected you just because it was trickling down all over you. And that's how it works. So these we go back to the FBI. I just simply don't know how they fix the problem, because it is so endemic into what's happening in there. I just don't know how it gets fixed, but anything can get fixed. But
I
hopefully
think
they listen to this show and they read your book and they're like, you know what, we need to change.
We need Errol. Let's hire
exactly.
him.
Call leader193.com.
Right.
But I think one thing, what I'm hearing, it's like, and I think maybe this will be the new way, or this is one way we can fix this problem, I think, in a little bit, or definitely in some ways, is what you said, John, is like, if you have a good leader has the balls, right, to have self-reflection, or to actually be reflected back. How is my leadership? What can I do better, right? Also, I think leaders of the future, right, and what we're trying to drive on the show, and Errol, what you're bringing into the work that you're doing, is how do you self-reflect? You meditate, you breathe, you get in touch with yourself, emotionally, right? You begin to understand like the habits of your leadership, right? And then the ones that work, the ones that don't work. You begin to utilize your personnel for their wonderful attributes, instead of it all being on you and all being about your power, all being about, literally your childish need to be seen or to be heard or to seem important, where it's like, realize you're not that fucking important. Like, you have a job to do. You happen to be in a leadership position, but if you really want to be effective and also I think what's important is the leaders that we love the most are the ones that are inclusive, the ones that are kind, the ones that have the ability or take those opportunities to be like, hey, like, how can I do things better? And and hopefully that's what this episode is helping people to become more aware of. But if you have the balls as a leader to be like, look, like, go to your team, go to your people, and be like, hey, like, are we on the right track? Are we off track? Like, and how can we do things better? Right. And hopefully we see more leaders like that in the future, for sure. And ones that are meditating, breathing, and understanding, like, that, anger, frustration, and power are not a great ways to lead, for sure.
Well, look, if there's a takeaway, right, from this thing, because this was good fun. We covered a lot of stuff. Totally. I would love to get on again and talk about the wellness aspect of this thing. But what's the takeaway? Mm-hmm. Do an anonymous survey. Go hire a company, do a 360 degree, and see it. Because there are ways to get those answers. So if you have the balls, figuratively.
Masculinity 2.0. It's going to say balls on the show, right?
If you figuratively have the balls, ladies, to get out there and do it. But that's a way. There's a way to do it. And that will be the scariest thing you do. But that's
the most
rewarding.
The
fact that you're doing that, your people will be like, damn.
That's right.
Yes. Okay. Respect in a new
way.
We're
with you. We're with you. I'm going to give it to you straight, but we're with you.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Great. Errol, thank you. Anything? Hey, plug whatever's coming up next for you, please, and your website before we leave.
Yeah, look, Leader 193 does 360 assessments.
There you go. All right. Dude, you're just killing it with the segues today.
but we do have a couple things. We've got a leadership and Wim Hof method retreat coming up, which I'll give you guys a discount code for your listeners.
Oh, nice.
It's out here. It's November 11th through 13th, going over all the wellness portions that we do. And then my process is going to be super meditative and reflective. It's going to be awesome. We just launched our Leader 193 Online Academy. It's essentially what I go through with my clients, the video series minus the one-on-one calls, but we've added bi-monthly calls for those members. So, that's out there at a super affordable price point. And I think we'll send you guys a discount code for that as well. So those are the new things we've got going on. Thank you.
Yeah. Staying busy, brother, making positive changes and leaders everywhere.
Yeah. Well, only through being at the pinnacle of my career for a second time on Men Talking Mindfulness.
Thank you. Errol.
Well done. Well, Errol, always a pleasure, brother. Will, Errol, love you guys and enjoy you guys' weekend. For those listening, hey, if you got something out of this show, make sure you share it with others and make sure you like and subscribe to our show. Follow us on YouTube and everywhere else. We appreciate you guys as listeners. And until next time, peace.
Peace. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Errol. John, awesome.
Joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out Men Talking Mindfulness